Welcome to Tom's True Crime. Today we take you to Fargo, North Dakota. Also, I'd love to know, where are you from? Fargo, North Dakota. March 25, 2018. 6 a.m. A man walking near a landfill site on the outskirts of Fargo made an urgent call to 911. He had stumbled upon the body of a young woman lying on the ground. She was cold to the touch and marks covered her neck. Her black leather jacket had blood on the hood. She had no shoes on, and her watch was smashed. It had clearly been a violent struggle. Authorities were there quickly, but there were no signs of life, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. It was obvious that they were dealing with a homicide. The only thing lying nearby was a dark blue belt with a large buckle. Apart from that, the area was bare and quiet. She had nothing that could identify her, so police released some images of what she was wearing and her distinctive tattoos, including a gun on her back. It didn't take long before a teen named Sandra called in. She was sobbing and said the tattoos matched those of her best friend, Julia Karborg. They had been out together the previous night but had separated in the early hours, and she hadn't seen her since. More calls gave the same name, and sure enough, it was Julia. Investigation began in the early morning hours of March 25, 2018, when a passerby found a severely injured 18-year-old on the road on the outskirts of Fargo. 18-year-old Julia Karborg had lived in Fargo, North Dakota all her life. Her family was big, and when her parents split when she was younger, they went on to create an even bigger one. Julia now had 4 younger sisters who looked up to her a lot, as she had recently reconnected with her biological father after some years. They didn't skip a beat and were loving spending so much time together. Friends said she was outspoken, never one to hold back her opinions. She was adventurous and enjoyed snowboarding, boating, and camping. Julia was feisty with great sense of humor and was never sure of people that wanted to hang out with her. She was busy having just started back at school and had been saving money working 2 jobs. She wanted to finish school, go to college to study business, and then move into the hospitality industry. Authorities started piecing together the previous day. They already knew that she had been out in the evening, which narrowed down her time of death considerably. Julia's friend Michelle was the first to come forward, and the pair had been close for years. Michelle said Julia would come to her for advice, and when Michelle found out Julia had dropped out of school, she was the person that encouraged her to go back and get her grades. On March 24th, Michelle had lent her some money for gas and asked her what her plans were. Julia told her she was meeting up with a few friends and might go to a party. Michelle hugged her goodbye, saying, "All right, girl, I'll see you soon," but she hadn't heard anything after that. The person she had been out drinking with, her best friend of many years, Sandra, was next to talk. The pair got close when Julia found out about Sandra's tumultuous childhood and adolescence and became a big support for her. They were inseparable. Spending most of their days together and going out for drinks was something they did often. Their night began just after midnight with Julia uploading a selfie of the 2 of them before they left. Sandra told police they had gone to several places together in Julia's car, starting off at the brewing company bar. Later, they went to a house party, then headed across town to the Colonial Pub and Grill. But Sandra said the house party was heavy, and after they left, the night was hazy. She did vaguely remember something happening in the Colonial Pub and Grill that she worried might be behind what had happened to her friend. Julia had started speaking to a random man at the bar. The pair seemed to be hitting it off. Julia asked him for a lighter and invited him to have drinks with them. Before Sandra could get to know him, Julia and the man left. Julia didn't say where they were going, and Sandra didn't get the man's name. She didn't even see what direction they had left in, or if they were on foot or driving in Julia's car. All she could remember was that he was white and it was around 4 a.m. For some reason, Julia had Sandra's phone, and Sandra had made her way back to visit her uncle, who corroborated her coming to see him by herself. Sandra couldn't offer up any more information, and what she had was blurry anyway. A few hours after she last saw her friend, a worried Sandra posted on Facebook, "Where are you? Haven't heard from you. Hope you made it home safe. Love you." Officers needed to find this mystery man, but they had little to go on. It is unconfirmed where Julia's car was found, but when it was covered in dust, dirt, dark marks on the side, and had long grass in the tires. Sandra's phone was in the car, seemingly confirming that Julia had taken it as she had left, and maybe she and the man had driven somewhere rather than walked. Detectives checked the footage from the bars, but they could not see Sandra or Julia anywhere, and no one had any recollection of them being there. However, it was a busy night, and it was possible that Sandra's timings were off. As Sandra's phone was found in Julia's car, they hoped that the phone data could be analyzed to show other locations Julia had gone to that night and fill in the gaps that Sandra couldn't. Sandra's phone had pinged at a McDonald's at 4:30 a.m., but she had made no mention of this. So, did Julia go there after leaving the bar? Julia's autopsy results finally came back, and it confirmed as they suspected. She had been strangled to death. They now felt confident that the belt found near her body was the murder weapon. Detectives kept trying to piece together Sandra's story, but they had a bad feeling in the back of their minds. Something about it was very off. Although it was entirely possible she had got things confused, and her timings were wrong because she was intoxicated, there was just nothing to indicate they were ever into the Colonial Pub and Grill, a place Sandra was adamant they were, and the same place Julia allegedly met this unknown mystery man. The months were passing by, and it was now September 2018. Investigators were still in the same place that they were back in March. People were still in shock and couldn't believe this had happened. Many a tribute was pouring in, including a big one from Sandra. They decided to go back to talk to Sandra's uncle again, and he was far more evasive than last time. But after some pushing, he suddenly had more to say. He told police that Sandra had said the pair had met two people in the bar that morning and gone back to a motel with them. The only thing she told him was that they were black males, whereas before she said Julia was talking to a white male, but she said she couldn't remember their names, what they were wearing, or where the motel was. She said at the motel they were all smoking marijuana, and an argument allegedly broke out over some cocaine. Sandra went to the bathroom. When she came back, she found Julia dead on the bed with marks on her neck. She told her uncle that the two men had pulled a gun on her and forced her to cover up what they had done. Although they didn't believe this story for various reasons, Sandra was at least admitting she knew Julia had been killed before she called the police to identify her. She had put herself at the scene and spoke of the marks on her neck. Sandra had racked up a long list of convictions and had over 50 since the age of 12. At this point, she was already in custody for another crime, so they could easily question her. The once so helpful and concerned friend who was happy to talk was suddenly quiet, uncooperative, and evasive. And when she didn't give them a thing, they had no choice but to leave. It was now over a year later, and police were hitting a wall. They felt they had exhausted every witness and lead. Most CCTV had long since expired and didn't tell them anything anyway, and no one had anything else to offer up. Julia wanted to finish school and open her own business, and do everything she could to be successful. And then life was taken from her. The police still only had one person of interest, Sandra Greneau. Investigators had been going through Julia and Sandra's social media accounts with a fine-tooth comb, wondering if something was staring them in the face, a comment buried away, or a message they hadn't seen. And then finally, they spotted something huge. In the tribute post Sandra had uploaded, the top half of the girls' outfits could clearly be seen. They realized that Sandra was wearing a belt that they recognized all too well. It was the same belt found by Julia's body, and what they now believed to be the murder weapon. The marks around her neck matched the weave of the belt exactly. With this fresh information, the belt was sent for more thorough DNA testing. Experts found Sandra and Julia's DNA on it. Authorities couldn't believe it, recognizing that if the photo had been taken at even a slightly different angle, this key piece of evidence would likely never have been linked to Sandra. It was still a complex case to build. They had no motive, and Sandra wasn't giving them anything. Months became years, and it was now almost 2 years since Julia had died. Finally, they got a tip from someone who hadn't spoken up. A friend of Sandra's had turned up at Julia's parents' house with a shocking story. She said that Sandra had come to her house that very morning, sometime after 5 a.m. She was very drunk and sobbing, and the friend described it as an alcohol-fueled rant. Sandra said that she and Julia had gotten into what she described as a heated argument, something over a cell phone, but she didn't elaborate. Hysterically crying and shaking, Sandra said she had hit and choked Julia to death with her belt. She pointed to something outside, and as the friend looked out, she saw Julia's car parked up, with Julia slumped against the window in the passenger seat, bleeding. Sandra didn't speak any more about the fight, what had caused it, or how it had escalated, but she made no mention of anyone else being there or a motel. Her friend was so shaken up she told Sandra to leave immediately. She got back in the car and drunkenly sped off. But once Sandra sobered up the next morning, the friend said she had claimed she couldn't remember anything that had happened that night and had seemingly forgotten everything. The friend was too scared to report this to the police, But as time ticked by, they decided to give the information to the family. Sandra's uncle also later admitted she had asked him to go along with her story, and he had given her several false alibis. Police said that she had manipulated the story, made up random people, used her uncle, posted lies to Facebook, and spent 2 years taking no responsibility. If she felt as bad as she said over what she had done, she could have taken Julia to hospital. Instead, she left her to die. In March 2020, Sandra Greneau was charged with second-degree murder and causing indignity to a body. The night of partying and drinking began with the two friends posing for a Facebook photo. It ended in tragedy, with Julia Karborg's body found on a rural road outside of Fargo. Sandra Greneau wore a baggy hooded jacket during the proceedings, at times using the long sleeves to cover her face. The 20-year-old is charged with second-degree murder in the death of Julia Karborg. The victim's family and friends wept in the courtroom as the charges were read. They were grateful that the investigators have been working on the case for almost 2 years, never giving up hope. She has 4 younger sisters. She loved her friends. She spent as much time with them as she could. She was a wonderful person whose life is cut short, and it's not fair. Nearly 6 months later, the accused commented on the post recounting a dream she had of the deceased teen, saying in part, "Woke up with tears in my eyes. I'm blessed to have met you and have you be a part of my life." Sandra Greneau's message concludes with "Rest in paradise, my angel." Along with the murder charge, the former friend is accused of causing an indignity to a body. Greneau has several outstanding court matters, recently being found guilty of assault and uttering threats in a December incident. Meanwhile, Karborg's family is remembering her as a happy student who loved her 4 younger sisters. With all the evidence against her, Sandra told them the same story she had told her friend that early morning. They were drinking and smoking a lot. And Sandra said, after the house party is where her memories started to go. She said she vaguely remembered going to a McDonald's where the pair started arguing. They left and started walking when Julia grabbed Sandra's phone. Sandra said she couldn't really remember how it had happened, but she remembered losing it and snapping. Everything went hazy, and suddenly Julia was unconscious on the ground. At the age of 21, she finally appeared in court and faced Julia's family for the first time. Sandra buried her head in her hands, crying and not looking at anyone. Second-degree murder is generally a deliberate killing that occurs without planning, but does not fall under any of the categories of first-degree murder. It can still carry a hefty sentence. Sandra's legal team announced that she was cutting a deal. She pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter rather than go through a trial for second-degree murder. She said she would take responsibility for Julia's death but had no memory of it, therefore manslaughter was appropriate. Through her lawyer, she said, "I will never forgive myself. Nothing I say or do will ever bring her back. I am very, very sorry. It shouldn't have ever happened." Her lawyer asked for sympathy considering the trauma her client had gone through. She didn't really have a relationship with her parents, had lost her mother young, and had a criminal record from the age of just 12 years old, racking up 54 convictions by the age of 19. Her memories of her parents were of them abusing drugs to escape the trauma that they had experienced as a result of childhood abuse. Sandra had moved in with foster parents who had physically and sexually abused her. And her lawyer said she was sexually assaulted a month prior to Julia's murder, which had significantly increased her drug and alcohol use. She began using much harder substances like meth. But people said it had to be noted that as awful as everything she had suffered was, Julia was somebody that had been there for her, through thick and thin, helping her manage her feelings, regulate her emotions, and always being a shoulder to cry on. Julia had been the one constant and support system in her life, the one person she always knew she could always turn to. She would have done anything for her. This is just a tragic situation where drug and alcohol use exploded. The defense's excuse was that Sandra had some very deep-seated personal issues that she was not dealing with. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, which we will never know, they turned into a very tragic situation for all involved. She knows the family would like an explanation, a reason. Unfortunately, she can't provide that, Sandra's lawyer said. Police and prosecutors say Sandra mentioned a cell phone potentially being the cause of the fight, but they don't know for sure. Sandra has never said anything else about it, and whether she remembers or not, has blocked it out, or is intentionally keeping quiet is still unknown. It will likely always be this way. Julia Karborg was 18 years old when her body was found just south of Fargo back in March of 2018. Sandra Greneau pleaded guilty to manslaughter in connection to Karborg's death, and the sentence that she received was agreed upon by the state and the defense. Greneau will serve a 7-year sentence for manslaughter. She was originally charged with second-degree murder, but pleaded guilty to the lesser-included offense of manslaughter. The facts surrounding this case was quite mysterious for about 2 years. What she remembers is that they left a house party that night. They were heavily intoxicated. Sandra Greneau says her last memory is of Karborg taking her phone. Sandra Greneau actually tried to mislead police in their investigation by saying that she was there that night, but that she had nothing to do with it, that she had left before anything had happened. She tried to make it seem like she was looking for a friend as well through Facebook postings. As far as a motive, the defense lawyer said that this is a case where we will never truly know what caused this woman to kill one of her closest friends, as she just does not remember it happening. However, she does take responsibility for her being the one responsible for this woman's death. 21-year-old Sandra was sentenced to 7 years in prison with a likely release date of 2027 or 2028. The judge said she needed to work a program in prison to help her with her addiction and anger. Honor your friend by becoming a positive, productive woman. You owe it to her to persevere, the judge said. There are still so many questions about what happened that night and why it happened. One person claims they can't remember, and the other can't talk at all. Karborg's family is still struggling to come to grips with the teen's death. Julia's little sister feels guilty if a day goes by where she doesn't think about Julia. She was 5 years old at the time of her death and says she's worried that if she doesn't think about her, it means she's forgetting her. The day before she was killed, her father was supposed to help fix something with her car, but he couldn't make it back in time. He said he thinks of this every day, knowing it could have been just one last time to hug her, and he was robbed of that. Thank you for being with us. If you'd like to support our channel and help us to continue to make content, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps us so much, and we really appreciate it.